December 24th, 2013, began like any other Christmas Eve in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Snow blanketed the suburban streets and the warm glow of holiday lights adorned the homes. Sarah Miller, 48, had been preparing for a quiet evening at home. A divorced mother of two, she had dedicated much of her life to her children, Emily, 25, and Ethan, 21. Emily, living out of state, was unable to return home that year, leaving Sarah and Ethan to celebrate together. The night turned deadly. At approximately 10:15 p.m., George Miller, Sarah's ex-husband, made a harrowing 911 call. He had stopped by Sarah's house to drop off a gift when he found her lifeless body in the kitchen. Blood pooled around her, staining the pristine white linoleum, and two knives lay beside her, glistening red. George's voice trembled as he told the operator, "I think it was Ethan. He's been acting strange." The responding officers, led by Detective Mark Williams, arrived within minutes. Inside, the scene was a nightmare. Sarah had been stabbed over 20 times, and the disarray in the kitchen suggested a struggle. Ethan was immediately identified as a person of interest. His history of erratic behavior and strained relationship with his mother raised red flags. Within hours, police located Ethan at George's home on the other side of town. His demeanor was chilling calm yet detached. Officers noticed scratches on his arms and traces of blood under his fingernails, though his freshly washed hands suggested an attempt to clean up. Ethan did not resist as they placed him in custody, his expression void of emotion. As the news broke, the community reeled in shock. How could a son commit such a heinous act against his own mother, especially during the season of peace and goodwill? This was the question that Detective Williams and his team were tasked with answering. The Miller family was no stranger to turmoil. Sarah and George divorced in 2008 after 20 years of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. While Emily appeared to navigate the separation relatively unscathed, Ethan struggled. Teachers noted his declining grades and erratic behavior, but his problems escalated after high school. By 2012, he had dropped out of college, and Sarah reported increased tension at home. The tipping point came earlier in 2013 when Ethan tested positive for opioids during a routine checkup. Sarah, concerned and determined, insisted he enter a rehabilitation program. Despite Ethan's vehement protests of innocence, George, skeptical of the test results and protective of his son, sided with Ethan. The decision fractured an already fragile family dynamic. Interviews with friends and neighbors painted a portrait of a troubled young man. Ethan was described as intelligent but reclusive, with an interest in conspiracy theories and obscure online forums. His relationship with his mother had become a volatile mix of dependence and resentment. Text messages recovered from Sarah's phone revealed her growing fear. "I'm worried he's not well. Sometimes he just stares at me like he doesn't even know who I am." The investigation intensified when Ethan confessed to the murder during questioning. "She had this look," he told Detective Williams. "It wasn't her anymore. It made me panic. I had to stop it." Further probing revealed a deeper layer to Ethan's psyche. He spoke of hearing voices, ominous commands that he could not ignore. He mentioned a cult led by a mysterious figure named Bradley Stanton, claiming Stanton had prophesied his mother's death. Detectives found no evidence of this cult, dismissing it as a delusion. Ethan's mental health became a focal point of the case. A court-appointed psychiatrist diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, a condition left untreated for years. This revelation added a tragic dimension to an already horrifying crime. Had Ethan's illness been properly addressed, could Sarah's life have been saved? As the investigation unfolded, the focus shifted to Ethan Miller's deteriorating mental state. Testimony from his former teachers and acquaintances painted a disturbing picture of a young man slipping through the cracks. By his late teens, Ethan had withdrawn from friends and began exhibiting erratic behavior, paranoia, mood swings, and bouts of aggression. Yet his symptoms were often dismissed as teenage rebellion or the fallout from his parents' divorce. The discovery of Ethan's journal provided chilling insight into his unraveling mind. Detective Mark Williams pored over the entries, which revealed a man plagued by delusions and auditory hallucinations. The writings were erratic, alternating between frantic scribbles and meticulous diagrams of what Ethan called the Grand Prophecy. He described a fictional cult led by Bradley Stanton, a figure Ethan believed communicated with him through television static. One entry, dated just days before the murder, stood out. "Mother is the obstacle. Stanton says she will poison me if I stay here. She's already planted the seeds. Christmas will be the end of it. Her eyes give it away." The journal also contains sketches of his mother, distorted and monstrous, her eyes exaggerated into haunting black voids. Psychiatric experts reviewing the materials would later describe them as evidence of advanced schizophrenia, compounded by untreated paranoia. But at the time, these writings were simply another piece in the disturbing puzzle. Neighbors began to speak out about Ethan's behavior leading up to the crime. One recalled a chilling encounter in the fall of 2013 when Ethan knocked on her door at midnight, insisting she had sent agents to watch him. Another described hearing loud arguments between Sarah and Ethan, often escalating to Ethan smashing household items in rage. Sarah, it seemed, had been fighting a silent battle to protect her son while fearing for her safety. Detective Williams knew the case wasn't as simple as a confession and a diagnosis. He needed to understand why Ethan had escalated to violence and why Sarah hadn't sought help earlier. What he uncovered would reveal the deadly cost of stigma and neglect. Forensic evidence corroborated Ethan's confession, though the sheer brutality of the attack shocked even seasoned investigators. The autopsy revealed that Sarah had sustained over 20 stab wounds, most concentrated on her upper body and face. Defensive wounds on her arms told a grim story of her desperate struggle to survive. Blood spatter analysis confirmed that the murder had occurred in the kitchen, where Sarah likely stood preparing dinner when Ethan launched his attack. The timeline of events became clearer through phone records and security camera footage. Ethan had returned from a quick trip to a nearby convenience store around 9:45 p.m. 15 minutes later, a neighbor reported hearing a loud crash and what sounded like muffled shouting. By 10:10 p.m., George Miller arrived to find the horrific scene. The discovery of a baseball bat in Ethan's bedroom added another layer of brutality to the crime. Blood and hair on the bat matched Sarah's, suggesting it had been used in the initial attack. Forensic psychologist Dr. Laura Chen, consulted by the police, remarked that the use of multiple weapons indicated not just rage but also a lack of coherence, a hallmark of psychosis. Ethan's interrogation provided further chilling details. He admitted that the argument began over dinner when Sarah mentioned Emily's absence for Christmas. She said Emily was smart to stay away. Ethan recounted, "She looked at me like she knew something, like she was planning something. That's when Stanton told me to do it." Detective Williams wrestled with the implications. Was this purely the result of mental illness, or had years of family conflict and neglect contributed to the violence? Interviews with Sarah's friends revealed a mother desperate to help her son, but unsure how to navigate the complexities of mental health care. One friend described Sarah crying after Ethan refused to see a doctor, lamenting, "What if he hurts himself? Or worse?" The pieces were coming together, but the more Williams learned, the more tragic the story became. Ethan Miller wasn't just a murderer, he was also a victim of a system that had failed him at every turn. As the case against Ethan Miller moved forward, it became apparent how deeply the cracks in the mental health system had impacted the Miller family. Sarah had sought help for Ethan on multiple occasions. Medical records revealed she had taken him to a therapist in 2010 after an outburst at school, but was told Ethan's behavior was typical teenage rebellion. Follow-up sessions were recommended, but Ethan refused to attend, and Sarah lacked the resources to force the issue. In 2012, Sarah again sought help when Ethan began expressing paranoid thoughts about people watching him through the windows. This time, she consulted with a psychiatrist who prescribed an antipsychotic. Ethan stopped taking the medication after 2 months, claiming it made him feel foggy. Sarah's attempts to get Ethan to continue were met with anger and occasional violence. Police records showed that, in March 2013, Sarah called 911 during a particularly aggressive episode. Officers arrived but left without filing a report when Ethan calmed down and promised to get better. Detective Mark Williams reviewed these incidents with growing frustration. He knew Ethan's story wasn't unique. Across the country, families struggled with the same impossible dilemma: how to protect their loved ones while navigating a system that prioritized autonomy over intervention. Ethan was an adult, and Sarah had no legal authority to compel treatment. Even George Miller admitted guilt during questioning. "I didn't think he was dangerous," George told investigators. "Sarah was always so dramatic. I thought she was overreacting. Now I'll never forgive myself." The investigation also revealed that the rehabilitation program Ethan had attended earlier in 2013 had been ill-equipped to address his deeper issues. Designed for substance abuse, the center had no resources for treating severe mental illness. Ethan's paranoia about being falsely accused of drug use only deepened during his stay, further fueling his resentment toward Sarah. The system's failures culminated in the events of Christmas Eve. By the time Sarah realized the depth of Ethan's mental decline, it was too late to save herself or her son. Detective Williams found himself asking the same question over and over: could this tragedy have been prevented? The trial of Ethan Miller began in late 2015, drawing national attention. Prosecutors faced the daunting task of securing a conviction against a defendant whose mental illness was undeniable. Ethan's defense attorney, James Holloway, argued that his client was not criminally responsible due to schizophrenia. The case became a battleground for debates about accountability, mental illness, and public safety. Prosecutors contended that Ethan had moments of clarity, pointing to his attempt to wash off blood and his coherent confession as evidence that he understood the nature of his actions. They sought a conviction for second-degree murder, arguing that Ethan's psychosis did not absolve him of responsibility. Sarah Miller's death was brutal and deliberate, said lead prosecutor Helen Carter. Mental illness does not erase the devastating choices Ethan made that night. The defense presented a harrowing portrait of Ethan's mental state. Expert witnesses testified that Ethan had been living in a delusional world for years, his perception of reality shaped by hallucinations and paranoia. Psychiatrist Dr. Laura Bennett explained that Ethan's actions were driven by fear, not malice. To Ethan, his mother was a threat, an agent of harm. She said, his mind twisted her love into something sinister. Emily Miller, Ethan's older sister, delivered an emotional statement during the trial. Visibly torn, she described her brother as both a loved one and a stranger. "The person who killed my mom wasn't the Ethan I grew up with," she said through tears. "But that doesn't mean he should be free to hurt anyone else." The jury deliberated for 2 days before delivering a verdict. Ethan Miller was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The decision meant Ethan would avoid prison, but would instead be committed to a high-security psychiatric facility for treatment. The ruling ignited fierce public debate. Some saw it as compassionate recognition of Ethan's illness, while others viewed it as an evasion of justice. For Sarah's family, the verdict brought little closure. George Miller expressed bitterness, calling it a slap in the face to Sarah's memory. Emily, meanwhile, admitted feeling conflicted. "I don't want him to suffer," she told reporters, "but I also don't think he should ever be allowed to walk free." Following the trial, Ethan Miller was committed to the Ridgeway High Security Psychiatric Facility in Missouri, a facility known for housing patients with severe psychiatric disorders and histories of violence. The years that followed saw Ethan receiving intensive treatment, including medication and therapy. For the first time, his schizophrenia was addressed in a controlled environment, and gradual improvements in his condition were reported by his doctors. Yet Ethan's progress remained tenuous. His journal entries, now monitored by staff, continued to reflect occasional bouts of paranoia and delusion. Ethan wrote of guilt, though it was unclear whether he truly understood the gravity of his crime. One entry read, "Mom's voice is gone now. It's quiet in my head, but the quiet feels heavy. She's everywhere, even though I can't see her." Family visits were rare. George Miller never visited his son, refusing to acknowledge him as part of the family. Emily Miller, though reluctant, visited Ethan twice in the years following his commitment. She described him as a shell of the brother she once knew. He was calm, medicated, but vacant, she later told a local reporter. "He apologized, but I don't know if it was real or if he just said it because he thought it would help. I don't know if he even remembers who she was." The Miller family struggled to rebuild their lives. Emily relocated to Chicago, distancing herself from the trauma that had defined her young adulthood. George, burdened by guilt and anger, fell into heavy drinking and estranged himself from Emily entirely. The house where Sarah had been murdered remained unsold, an eerie monument to the tragedy. In the public sphere, the case lingered in local memory as a grim example of the consequences of untreated mental illness. Advocacy groups used Ethan's story to push for reforms in mental health care, highlighting the need for earlier intervention and better resources for families in crisis. Despite this, little changed in the years that followed. The Miller tragedy seemed destined to become another cautionary tale, forgotten by all but those closest to it. In 2024, nearly a decade after the murder, Ethan's case resurfaced in headlines when the Ridgeway facility announced plans to transfer him to the Appalachian Center for Observation, a lower-security psychiatric hospital in North Carolina. Doctors at Ridgeway cited his consistent progress and reduced risk of violence as justification for the move. The news sparked outrage among Sarah Miller's surviving family. Emily, now 36, publicly denounced the decision. "He may be stable now, but what happens if he stops taking his medication? What happens if he convinces someone he's safe to release? My mother didn't get a second chance, so why should he?" Emily's concerns were echoed by victims' advocacy groups, who argued that Ethan's crime was too severe to warrant a reduction in security. George Miller, reclusive and embittered, issued a brief statement through his attorney, calling the transfer an insult to Sarah's memory. The controversy reignited media interest in the case, leading to renewed scrutiny of Ethan's time at Ridgeway. Investigative journalists uncovered that while Ethan had shown improvement, there had been several troubling incidents, including an altercation with another patient in 2021 and a brief refusal to take his medication in 2023. Critics argued that these incidents demonstrated Ethan's ongoing instability, while the facility maintained that such occurrences were not uncommon in long-term psychiatric care. Ethan himself remained largely silent, shielded from the media by hospital staff. His doctors insisted that the transfer was a necessary step in his rehabilitation, emphasizing that he would still be under constant supervision. "Ethan Miller is not being released," said Dr. Samuel Hodge, the psychiatrist overseeing the transfer. "He is still receiving treatment. This is about providing a more therapeutic environment, not about reducing accountability." The transfer proceeded as planned, but it left a bitter taste in the mouths of those who remembered the brutal events of Christmas Eve 2013. For the Miller family, it was another painful chapter in a story that seemed to have no end. The aftermath of Ethan Miller's transfer to the Appalachian Center for Observation deepened the fractures within the Miller family. For Emily, the move was a betrayal of the justice system. She believed Ethan's apparent progress masked a lingering danger. "People don't see the Ethan I grew up with," she said in a television interview. "They see a mentally ill man in a hospital gown, but I see the boy who could explode in rage at the smallest thing, the man who butchered my mother." Her words struck a chord with the public, reigniting debates about the balance between rehabilitation and justice. Advocacy groups sympathetic to Ethan pointed out the systemic failures that led to Sarah's death, emphasizing that Ethan himself was a victim of those shortcomings. Opponents, however, saw the transfer as the first step toward eventual freedom for Ethan, a possibility Emily found unbearable. George Miller, however, had grown indifferent to the ongoing developments. Consumed by guilt and resentment, he declined all interviews and withdrew from public life entirely. Reports surfaced that he had been hospitalized for liver failure related to chronic alcoholism, a condition he refused to treat. "Let the world forget Ethan," he reportedly told a friend. "I wish I could." Meanwhile, at the Appalachian Center, Ethan's doctors reported that he adjusted well to his new environment. The facility offered more freedom, with structured activities and therapy sessions aimed at reintegration. Yet, those who reviewed his progress notes found troubling details. Ethan continued to exhibit signs of lingering delusions, particularly during periods of stress. One therapist noted his fixation on a figure named Stanton, though Ethan no longer described Stanton as commanding him. Instead, he referred to Stanton as a shadow in the corner, always watching. Emily monitored the situation closely, using every legal avenue available to ensure Ethan's confinement remained secure. She filed a petition to block any further reduction in Ethan's restrictions. "This isn't about revenge," she told reporters. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what my family did." The petition gained significant support, but legal experts noted that without evidence of recidivism or a direct threat, it would be difficult to prevent Ethan's continued treatment progression. Still, Emily refused to give up, driven by a sense of duty to her mother's memory. When a routine evaluation at the Appalachian Center revealed signs that Ethan had stopped taking his medication, staff acted quickly, addressing the lapse before his symptoms worsened. But the incident reignited fears about his capacity for violence. Emily used the event as ammunition in her ongoing fight, arguing that even a brief lapse in treatment could have catastrophic consequences. The incident also led to a reassessment of Ethan's mental state. Psychiatric evaluations indicated that while he had made progress, his underlying condition remained severe and lifelong. Doctors began advocating for permanent supervised care, a decision that aligned with Emily's demands but angered rehabilitation advocates who had championed Ethan's case. For Ethan, the years at the Appalachian Center brought moments of clarity and anguish. He spoke occasionally about his crime, expressing regret in abstract terms. "I didn't want to hurt her, but it was like my hands weren't mine, like someone else was pulling the strings." That same year, Emily published a memoir titled "Her Eyes Were Watching Me," chronicling her family's descent into tragedy. The book was both a tribute to her mother and an indictment of the system that failed to save Ethan. It received critical acclaim and sparked renewed calls for mental health reform. Despite the memoir's success, Emily remained haunted by the past. "No book, no petition, no court ruling will ever bring her back," she said in an interview. "I just hope her story makes people listen, because the next family might not be as lucky as mine. They might not survive." Ethan's treatment plan was solidified. He would remain in permanent, high-security psychiatric care. For Emily, it was a bittersweet victory. She had ensured her brother would never hurt anyone again, but the scars of her family's tragedy would never fully heal. Ethan Miller's case faded from public memory as the years passed, becoming a footnote in the ongoing discourse about mental health and the criminal justice system. But for those who lived it, the Miller family, the investigators, and the community, its lessons remained seared in their minds. It was a story of failure at every level, of a system that overlooked a young man in need, of a family fractured by conflict, and of a life lost too soon. In the end, Sarah Miller's legacy was not just the tragedy of her death, but the conversations it sparked about the need for change, a change that perhaps could prevent another Christmas Eve from becoming a nightmare. The story of Sarah and Ethan Miller, though no longer making headlines, remained a quiet specter in Cedar Rapids and beyond. The house where the murder occurred was eventually sold to a young couple who knew little of its history. Neighbors still whispered about the tragedy, their voices low as they passed the property, now painted a cheerful blue.